Hello everyone! Today we are getting into a topic that I'm very passionate about, which is writing historical fiction. As you may know, I love historical fiction. I grew up on historical fiction and my first couple books were historical fiction. And it was much to my surprise then that I realized that this precious genre is so low on the popularity list. Romances and fantasy come first. Well, that's not too surprising, but I was surprised, surprisingly. And I just couldn't help but wonder why. Because to me, historical fiction is like the most amazing genre out there. Not because I'm biased or anything, but anywho, this genre tends to make me feel like it actually was real, that it actually happened, and that this is a true story. If done correctly, it can and will do this. And so, now that I am choosing to read books myself, since I'm not in school anymore, since I'm choosing my own books, I've become very disappointed in a lot of historical fiction that I read. And for a while I thought it was just because I had fallen out of love with reading. But then I also wondered if the books themselves were to blame, but I wasn't really sure. Then while editing Out of the Dark, it hit me. Historical fiction is written differently than it used to be. So then I wondered, why hadn't I thought of that sooner? And the more I thought about this, the more I realized this was indeed the case. Historical fiction is not written as well as the other genres. It's not written with the same amount of quality, if that makes sense. This is a shame because these stories have so much potential. And sadly, I think the writer of the modern age has largely forgotten how to write them. Or they don't really think to write them, just because romance and fantasy, which are great by the way, but they forget about historical fiction because those two other genres are so popular and they want to write the popular books. Because, after all, if you do write romance and fantasy, you will be more likely to have a successful career. So, with this post, I want something to change. I want people to realize that historical fiction should be written more often, and that it should be written well, and I'm going to show you how you should write it well. So first of all, what is historical fiction and what is it not? Put simply, historical fiction is just a fictitious plot set in real historical time period. Okay? So this means there are real places, real events, real people, real dates. But it does not mean that it has straight facts or is biographical. That is different. Okay? Historical fiction doesn't mean this happened exactly this way. It is historical fiction, fiction set in the past, typically 50 years or so after the event. Otherwise, it's more known as contemporary fiction. Historical fictions include lots of war novels, discoveries, adventures, and more. Christie, Shane, and Gone with the Wind are just a few books in this genre. And now with a lot of other genres, this one has a ton of subgenres. And that's because historical fiction is simply a setting genre, just like sci-fi or fantasy. They're all set in a certain place or time, but the style or subject matter can change drastically. So I'm going to list just a brief list, an overview of the different subgenres over there. So first we have historical romance, which I think is self-explanatory. It's just a romance novel set in the past. And this includes stories such as Bridgerton and Pride and Prejudice. It's been a long day. And then there's biographical historical fiction. And this is where the author takes a real historical figure and weaves fact and fiction into a compelling story based on the figure's life. If you ever read the YWAM missionary books, these are a really good example of these. And so is, what's it called? Little House on the Prairie. The Little House on the Prairie series is also really good biographical historical fiction. It's in fact I'm not going to try to say it, but you know what I mean. Hopefully. And then there's historical I can't talk. Historical sanity. Historical fantasy or sci-fi. And this is just fantasy or sci-fi set in the past, with magical details or flair in history. And examples of this, I've heard, I haven't watched or read these yet, but examples are Outlander by Diana Gabaldon, I think, the Outlander series, and Wayfarer by K.M. Weiland, and The Nevers, which is a TV series, I think. So that's some, and here are some more subgenres. There's historical mysteries, like Sherlock Holmes. They're just mystery books set in the past. And there's historical horror, which, yes, is a thing. I did not realize that. And this is usually when authors add dread or creepy details to an already difficult or disturbing part of history. And I thought that was really fascinating, but not really something I would enjoy. And then there's historical adventures, which are probably the most popular. There are battles, quests, explorations, you name it. These are very popular, and these books could be about the Civil War, the Oregon Trail, the Vikings, the Crusades, Christopher Columbus, the English Civil War, anything. Anything with a lot of drama or excitement or something out of the ordinary in history. And then there's historical children's novels, which are any historically set story geared toward children. That's more of an age-geared subgenre. And so, as you've undoubtedly noticed, the key to these subgenres is the historical part. So no matter what subgenre it is, it has to be set in the past. Real time, real place. Well, actually not necessarily in a real place, because like in The Prisoner of Zenda, it's set in the past, but it's in a made-up place, a made-up country, which I thought was really cool. Check out that book if you're interested. And something that used to not be historical fiction, which used to be contemporary, like the Jane Austen books, those were contemporary. Now they're considered historical fiction because they're set in the 1820s, 1830s-ish. And to us, that's like 200 years ago. So just because something isn't originally historical fiction doesn't mean it isn't now. So now to get to the main part of the video, which is how to write historical fiction. This is the fun part, because this is the whole reason why I'm filming this video. So I'm gonna get right into it. So setting is everything. The space, the environment, the culture, the language, the people, the city or town or village layouts, the occupations, the foods, the clothing, the politics, the inherent conflicts that arise from the culture, the beliefs, the religions, superstitions, ideals, anything, you name it, it's important because it builds the whole it builds the whole book, and I'll get into that more in a minute. But research is everything. Do not exclude anything. Historical fiction is a setting genre after all, and if the world isn't properly researched, you can't build a realistic world. And if you can't build a realistic world, you can't create a realistic story, and your story will fail. No one wants that. And that is the reason why a lot of modern day books fail when they are historical fiction books. So, research is imperative for 3 reasons. First, experiencing history is the only reason your reader picked up your book. Do not disappoint them. The more details and information you include, or don't include, the more your reader will be drawn into the story and want more. They'll enjoy that book and go and read all your other ones. You're showing what life was like back in history, so don't misrepresent it. It's a big responsibility. Second, setting shapes character. In the modern world even, where we grow up shapes us. We are where we live. The values, the interactions between people, the culture, all have an impact on us. For example, I'm originally from Ohio, where it is mostly business first. People are expected to stay out of the way in high traffic places, and small talk is usually left to friends or family. I don't remember any chatty conversations with people that I met on a day-to-day basis. Because of where I grew up, I am, hopefully, I hope, very polite in public. I stand out of the way so that I don't get in a path and block it up, and I am naturally very business first in public. However, my family and I moved to Wyoming when I was 16, and the culture here surprised me. It's not so much business first. Slowly I'm changing to match the culture, not deliberately, but naturally. I'm more likely to chat with cashiers at the store. I'm not so self-conscious about standing in the way, although I still am. I'm not as much as I used to be. And my tendency to save everything is growing. I used to be that way when I was real little, but it is coming back again. Because out here, no one wastes anything. They reuse and keep everything. So this is only one example, but hopefully you get the point. To understand your characters, you must understand the environment in which they grow up and live. So the third reason why research is important is because setting shapes the story. This is the biggest mistake I've seen in modern historical fiction, and that is the disregard for the culture and its implications for the story. So many writers force their story onto the setting, whereas you need to study the setting and let the story come up naturally out of the setting. Otherwise, the story will feel fake or forced, because it would be. So, going back to world building, how is it done in this culture? In this genre. So, have you ever written a fantasy book? Writing historical fiction is very similar. To write fantasy, you create a world, complete with social structures, environment, food, clothing, customs, beliefs about the world, and about the creatures in it, and more. Writing songs and stories for that world to include in your book are also very helpful. And the more details you create, the more believable the world is. Writing historical fiction is the exact same way, only you're researching everything. Make no assumptions about anything, but research it all. History, even 50 years ago, is vastly different than our modern day. And further back you go and different places you go for the setting, the more research you'll need to do. So now that we talked about how to write historical fiction and what it is, let's talk about the most common mistakes. So, starting off with inaccurate details. So, I know I basically covered this just a moment ago, but I want to emphasize it one last time. Readers will catch inaccurate details. For me, that is clothing. I've studied historical clothing just enough, and I started about a year ago as part of my research for my Viking book, and it is a passion of mine now, and it drives me crazy when authors don't take the time to research clothes correctly, because I notice those tiny little details that most people wouldn't notice. Make sure your terminology is correct and the different layers of clothing, the styles of clothing, the colors, the what's called the fabric type, like cotton or linen or polyester, things like that. Something that I've found the most to be inaccurate in historical clothing is corsets. And there's one novel that was set in the Civil War, and this one mentioned corsets 2 or 3 times, and almost all of them were inaccurate. One of them, it was right up against the skin. Another one was she couldn't breathe with them on, and another one was they were called stays. The author clearly had not researched clothing and what they were like in the Civil War. But things like clothing and a lot of other details in historical fiction that you think that's not important, it is very important because it's what makes it part of the culture. And it's not an excuse for authors anymore to be like, oh, I can't find information on this thing. Sometimes that is the case, but very, very, very rarely now. There's a ton of stuff on the internet now. It should not be a problem. So another problem in modern historical fiction novels is modern slang. Nothing sounds more out of place than modern high school slang in medieval Europe, or even as late as the 1940s, for that matter. So you should learn how people spoke in that time and place and try to mimic that as much as possible without making it hard for your readers trying to read your book. Just add a little bit, just enough to give it the otherworldly feel to it. For example, I used a lot of Viking terminology in my book, Out of the Dark. And I found that a ton of words in English are from Old Norse, and so I used a lot of those too to try to give a more Old Norse feel. That's something else that you can do. Now, those are the biggest mistakes, and I hope that you really consider them and think about all the details that you need to research, even the most mundane things. Like, I researched the types of kitchen stuff the Vikings used to cook. I researched that. I researched if they had scissors. I researched garden beds, and I have found out that they had raised garden beds back in the Viking Age, and that was unbelievable for me. So things like that, and just go wild with it and make sure it's from good resources. And those resources usually take it from original documents, from archaeology, from stories from that time and place. But that's just a few tips and do's and don'ts for historical fiction. So I really hope you consider this and maybe write your own historical fiction book one day. So just remember that if you can write fiction, you can write historical fiction. There's nothing mysterious about that. You just need to make sure that the historical is actually historical. So let me know in the comments your thoughts about this, and if you haven't subscribed already, please do that. And if you like this video, go ahead and like it for me and drop a comment, and I would greatly appreciate it. And I will see you guys next time with another writing video. Bye.